Welcome back, fellow football fanatics. It's College Football with Sam tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Time as we are scheduled to be live. And today we are bringing on I would say, friend of the show because I've been on his show before and it was absolutely wonderful. This is, I would say, professional sports analyst. He's really smart with what he does. Snowman Sports. Welcome in. He primarily operates on Twitch, if I'm not mistaken. Am I mistaken there?
Yes, I stream every day, pretty much 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern, talking sports gambling on Twitch. We love betting on college football, college basketball, but we talk pretty much every single sport. Talk about some pop culture, entertainment. It's a fun time. It's a good show. It was great to have you on about last week. The Snowmaniacs were a big fan of college football with Sam. We're definitely going to have you come on more so.
Awesome. I don't know if I should be surprised by that, but I guess I am a little bit because I try to keep myself at least humble to a certain degree, but glad to know that your fans enjoyed it. Here's to hoping that my fans will enjoy this, and I think they will because I have a surprising amount of Indiana people who follow my show. And we used to be almost exclusive Big Ten here. Now we're kind of trying to cover a little bit of everything. But before we get into this, let everyone know where they can find you, like any specific Twitch name or any other socials that you have. Let them know. Let the people know.
Yeah, so I'm Snowman Sports pretty much on all platforms. The main place you can find me is Twitter, Snowman_sports. I got to find the guy who has the actual name with no underscore. I've looked at him before. He doesn't really even tweet anymore. So I got to figure out how to get in contact with him to buy it off him. But everywhere else is just Snowman Sports, TikTok, Twitch. So check me out there. I'm going to try to get more active on YouTube and Instagram and all that as we get into the football season. I definitely want to be expanding content. But for the most part, Twitch is the best way to find me. And, of course, you follow me on Twitter. I'm posting links to Twitch there all the time, posting plays. Talking about sports, bitching about my bets. It's a fun time.
It is very fun. You've been a very entertaining Twitter follow over the past, I would say, I forget how long I've been following you, but I was actually introduced to Snowman Sports by Corn Crazed. That's the mutual link here, guys. He had him on to preview the 2024 season. I remember watching that whole thing, and it was a very insightful episode. It was very interesting, and we have to get Connor back on this show at some point, and I know he wants to get me on his. Let's kick this off, though, by talking about something that I think has been an entertaining watch, not just last year, but in 2020. And if you really hate the Hoosiers, then I would say that valley of 2021 to 2023 was particularly entertaining. What has it been like as an Indiana fan ever since you became a diehard Hoosier? What's it been like? I know you went to school there. So
I mean, you say valley of 2021 to 2023. I say 2020 was like a blip on the positive radar, and now we're maybe starting to see a little bit of like upward growth. My freshman year of IU, I was a freshman in 2012, and I never really followed too much IU football prior to it. I was living in Chicago, living in Big Ten country, and all people talked about was Michigan, Ohio State, Notre Dame, maybe University of Illinois, occasionally Northwestern just because it was in the area. But you wouldn't really hear anything about IU because what was there to talk about with IU? This is one of the dumpster fire programs in the history of college football. The program the university has never really cared about it. It was always basketball. Like there's literally, the quote, like in 49 other states, it's just basketball, but this is Indiana. We had a great soccer program, great swing program, great baseball program, but the football program was just never anything good. My freshman year, the head coach of the team was a guy named Kevin Wilson. He was the former offensive coordinator of Oklahoma. So at least they tried to go out and bring in a big-time power program coordinator. He worked under Bob Stoops. I certainly won't say he's a precursor to Lincoln Riley because Kevin Wilson is a horrific head coach. He was not even that good as offensive coordinator. He went out to Ohio State after leaving IU and was a bad offensive coordinator there. I think he's the head coach of Tulsa now.
Yes.
I could be wrong, but Wilson had a super up-tempo, high-powered offense, and it was one of those things where the games were fun to go to because they were high scoring, and it would usually be, like Wisconsin 50, Indiana 25, or 24, I guess, a more realistic football score. But in all my 4 years at IU, we never once made a bowl game. Never once won a bowl game. We did make a bowl game my senior year where we played Duke, and the kick in overtime was good from the Hoosiers. People forget the refs called it no good, but the kick was good, and we still should be in double overtime right now against Duke. But IU has not won a bowl game, I believe, since 1991. And 6 wins was the most I ever saw. Indiana has not really had too many winning seasons. It really took until Michael Penix Jr. came to campus in 2020, alongside a great coaching staff with Kalen DeBoer at offensive coordinator, with Cade Womack as defensive coordinator, who are now the head coach of Alabama. And I believe Womack is now the DC at Bama. He was at South Alabama as head coach prior to that. But these are guys who've gone on and had tons of experience. DeBoer brought Penix with him to Washington when they made the national championship game. So, it kind of felt like it was a blip on the radar. Tom Allen took over my senior year. Kevin Wilson had some off the field issues. I forget what it was. Either it was something to do with a student on campus that they ended up firing him for. Maybe it's a student on the team, they were punishing him too hard or whatever shit was going on at the time. But Tom Allen took over, and, he was always a great coach to watch. He was a fun coach. He's a great leader. But, he never really was able to get the job done as coach. So it kind of just felt like, okay, we had, that little blip on the radar where that seems to be what IU's max is. And I always thought it's like, okay, what we need to do is follow this model, and we need to get more guys like DeBoer, get more guys like Womack, and try to find these young up-and-coming coordinators that we can bring in and say, hey, here's a Big Ten conference. You're going to get your chance to prove your worth against the Ohio States, the Michigans, the Penn States of the world. And then you'll go on and get poached by a bigger program after you have success, but at least we'll have some small success in the meantime. Well, now that all changed last season when we brought in Curt Cignetti, and Curt Cignetti has completely turned the program around, completely turned the fan base around. It's not just going out and making the playoffs. I mean, IU is putting way more money in the program. I think Cignetti's going to be here for the long term. Honestly, I think if he were going to leave, he would have left last season when his stock was at the all-time highest. But as we'll talk about, I'm very bright on the future of IU football, and I think we probably have made it out of the worst of it, where we were clearly the worst program in the Big Ten for years and years.
Oh, it was so bad. I remember 2023 and 2022 as clear as day, because that happens to be when my school, when I was in attendance, and I'm almost done with my education at Michigan. Only have one class left, just completed my second to last a few days ago.
Do you have the Matt Leinart schedule, or you're just taking ballroom dancing as your final credit?
No. I'm taking one more econ course, but it should be pretty manageable. Just one more instead of a full load or 2 classes.
Right.
But those were the high marks for Michigan in the 21st century, really. 13-1 and then 15-0. And the high point of Indiana those years were, I think, beating Illinois in 2022 and then playing it close with Penn State in 2023. It was so bad. And then Cignetti comes in, and I was fortunate enough to think that, yeah, they'll probably go to a bowl game, and I picked the over on their win total. But I had no idea that they would be rolling into that Ohio State game 10-0. Like, that was insane.
I'm as delusional of an IU fan as it gets. I mean, I was always the guy when I was a student there who would be in the games the entire game. And I think that's sad to say, because that just wasn't the vast majority of the situation of, many fans there. I remember that my freshman year, the first game on campus, this is my first week of school. I had no idea what the social, situation was around football. My dorm was the closest dorm to the football stadium. So me and a couple other guys on my floor were like, all right, it's 11 o'clock football game. We'll leave at 10:45. We'll get to the game, and, we're super close, so we'll make it in time. Well, we leave, 15, 20 minutes before the game starts. And again, we're the closest closest dorm to the stadium. And all I remember is it was like there was a murderer coming the other way, because it was just crowds and crowds and crowds of people leaving away from the football stadium, because that was the culture of IU. They go to the stadium, to the tailgate fields, you drink pregame, you party, you're up at 6 a.m. Now, of course, I didn't realize this was my first week on campus. in the future I'd be up at 6 in the morning drinking and partying, but that was what they did. They go up early, drink and party by the football field, and then when the game starts, that's when you go back to your dorm, back to your frat house, back to your apartment. You take a nap, you sleep off the booze so that you're ready to party again later that night. And then, go to the games, and the games are maybe half full at the start, quarter full, depending on, if the opponent is. Maybe it's a little bit more full for a big time game when the other team's fans are there. But even so, I remember the biggest attendance I'd ever seen was also my freshman year. We were actually decent that year. I think we went 6-6 or maybe 5-7 or something, which was good for IU at the time. But that was a year that Ohio State was sanctioned for the Terrell Pryor tattoo situation, and Penn State was sanctioned for the Jerry Sandusky situation. And that was during the Legends and Leaders Conference era.
Yes.
Where both those teams were in Indiana's division. So it was those two were undefeated, but ineligible to make the Big Ten championship game. Wisconsin was in third, Indiana was in fourth. And we were maybe 3-4, and they were 4-3, or maybe even 4. They were significantly ahead of us. But it was looking at the schedule, if we win, now we have the tiebreaker over Wisconsin. And Wisconsin, I still think, had some losses coming at Ohio State or Penn State or Michigan or something. So it was one of the situations where it was hey, if we win this game, there is a very realistic chance that we can make the Big Ten championship game, because Penn State and Ohio State were suspended. So the stadium was maybe 3/4, 80% full, which was by far the most full I'd ever seen it to start the game. And Wisconsin ended up running for, I believe, 600 yards of offense on IU that day. They were up 40, legitimately 40 points at halftime. I'll see if I can find the box score, but this is a team that had Melvin Gordon, James White, Monty Ball.
Yes.
This was the stacked ass Wisconsin team as it gets. And by halftime, the stadium was a quarter full because everyone just left. It was all right, well, it was a good chance that we could have made the Big Ten championship game if we competed, but there was nothing to be done. Let me see if I got the box score. Here we go. Here's the box score of the game. Wisconsin 62, Indiana 14. Wisconsin up 24-7 at halftime, up 41-7 at the end of the third quarter. They were up, let's see, Monty Ball had 200 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns. White, 161 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns. Melvin Gordon, 96 yards. They had 564 yards total rushing. It was just an absolute beatdown.
That's exactly what they did to Nebraska in the Big Ten championship game. They hung 70 points, and it was just all rushing offense. It was crazy. Yeah. What a time to go all the way back to a little over a decade then. And now here you are, and there are some people who have Indiana preseason ranked top 10 or top 15. When was the moment last year where you knew that Indiana wasn't just just an okay team that had an easy schedule? When did you know that they were okay? This is a legit good team that can compete to get into the playoffs.
Honestly, I think it was the Western, not playoffs, because there's a difference between that. I didn't think Indiana could be a legitimate playoff team really until that Nebraska game, because the schedule was just super easy. And, the UCLA game was a big eye opener. It was holy shit, we just went on the road to UCLA, dropped 40, beat them by 30. But it was honestly the Western Illinois game, because even though they're a dog shit team, I don't think Indiana has ever scored 77 points in the 12 years that I've been watching. So even being able to do that much and execute against a bad opponent, it's okay, maybe this team has something going offensively. Then UCLA is all right, we got something cooking here. 6-0, I believe the win total was maybe 5.5 last year. So they already had smashed the win total over by that game. And this Nebraska, and it's all right, Indiana's at home. The crowd is getting hyped. It felt like this was a similar situation that we've seen a bunch of times in the past. Now, granted, I can't give a example during the COVID season, which would have been after that Penn State win. The stadium would have been absolutely packed because that was a good team that year. But it just felt like too many times where it felt like the IU program has had momentum in the past, and then the first chance they have, it just dies. And that was when it's oh, holy shit, we just beat a pretty good team, all things considered, a competitive Nebraska team by 50, didn't even give them a chance. And then, at that point, it's okay, I feel like we can relatively compete. And they went on, and, I feel like my issue was always, making the playoffs is different than competing in the playoffs, because
Yes.
I still felt like IU never really had the talent to make a deep run in the playoffs. But at least, just making it to the playoffs is a dream that Indiana fans probably never thought was going to be achieved ever, let alone in the first year of Cignetti and the 12-team playoff.
Absolutely. I think it was for me, the Maryland game where they turned it over, I think, 4 or 5 times and still were able to pull away and win by 20 points.
Mhm.
And that was before Maryland really, I think, got broken by the tough schedule. That's when I thought to myself, okay, if you can beat Maryland while having a -3, -4 turnover differential, and you can beat them by that many points, you have something there. And I just kept picking them to win and win and win, and they kept really doing it. Of course, against Ohio State and against Notre Dame, well, different story, but those teams played in the national championship game. There's no shame.
Right. And that's what I love with this new IU program is like, I see everything on Twitter and it's like, oh, IU canceled the Virginia game. Would Alabama ever do that? Would Georgia ever do that? I'm like, what world do you guys live in that we're comparing the Indiana program to Alabama? And it's like, oh, well, Indiana was good, but they didn't do well. Yeah, we didn't do well against the national champions and the runner-ups in that. Like, okay, so you're saying that we're considered a top 3, top 5 team if those are teams are being compared to? I fucking love it. It's insane how much the reputation has changed in one season. I mean, like you said with the Maryland game, Maryland is looked at the bottom of the Big Ten right now. Maryland beat Indiana 2 years ago by 30 points.
Yes.
Like that's what's like literally the season before Signetti got here. They dominated us, thoroughly whipped us. And it would be a point where it was like, do I think Indiana's better than Maryland? Of course not. Why would I ever think Indiana's be better than Maryland? And now all of a sudden it's like, oh, we're comparing Indiana to the Texases and Clemsons of the world. Like what even happened?
Absolutely. I mean, it was so stark last year seeing how Curt Signetti did in year 1, taking over that program, and then how Jonathan Smith did in year 1 at Michigan State, or a few years ago, how Deion Sanders did year 1 at Colorado, or even how Sark did at Texas in year 1 in 2021. It really did take the college football world by storm. Before we resume, everyone, please make sure, for those of you watching right now, or really after we're live, it's important to hit that like button to help us get into the algorithm. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and also hit the notification bell. And go over to Snowman Sports on Twitch and also Snowman Sports on Twitter. Give him a follow. Hit his notification bell. I don't know if they have one on Twitch, but I know they have one on Twitter.
I think if you just hit follow on Twitch, it's supposed to auto-notify you every time, but it's the notification system will be wonky. I don't think there's anything really extra you can do, unfortunately.
Well, make sure to watch his stuff then. Again, he said 11 a.m. Central Time, right?
Yes. 11 a.m. Central, noon Eastern, the majority of times. And it'll be obviously earlier on college football Saturdays moving forward, and so the schedule will be changing a little bit, but for the most part, that's when you can find me.
Awesome. Well, now that we've talked about Indiana's past a little bit and your experiences, let's get into what this team brings to the table this year. Let's do a little bit of a fun exercise. I'm going to go through the entire Big Ten, and I want you to stop me at the team where you think Indiana is not better than that team. So I'm going to start from what I think is the worst, go all the way up, and you can stop me when you think I've finally hit a team that would beat Indiana on a neutral field. Purdue, Maryland, UCLA, Northwestern, Washington, Michigan State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Nebraska, Illinois, USC, Iowa, Michigan, Oregon.
Oregon, stop.
That's crazy. Because I'd be right in agreement there with you. Only Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State ahead of them.
Absolutely. I'd love to hear it. And, again, I like to hear it from you as you're obviously a Michigan fan and unbiased Indiana supporter. I'm trying not to let IU's success go to my head because, again, there have been so many times throughout my history as an IU fan where I see them and it's like, hey, this guy looks good. This team looks good. I'm optimistic for next season. And then it comes crashing down 3-9, 4-8. I just can't think that's going to happen with Curt Signetti. I mean, he's come in and he's completely changed the program around. And it's not just from they made the playoffs, which does have something to do with it, but it's with the fans, how they are reacting. Like the stadium is completely sold out every single game now. People are actually talking and caring about Indiana football. Do you know how many conversations I had on campus about Indiana football with maybe outside of 1 or 2 people? in the 4 years I was there? Probably zero. Like two of my closest friends, they're huge football fans also. They would go to the game. We would all go to the games together. And we would talk, but like, what was our talk in the off season like? Oh, maybe we can make a bowl game this year. I'm hyped for this freshman who looked good. It was never like, we're going to compete for the Big Ten. And now, like, the money has been pouring into the program. I believe Indiana has like a top 10 coaching staff in the country in terms of dollars paid. They paid big money to both coordinators in Bryant Haynes and Mike Shanahan to retain both those guys. Because again, normally when you have a upstart program that comes out of nowhere and has a huge season, those coordinators are the first ones snatched up to go.
Yeah, they get
by
poached.
The Bamas, by the Georgias, by the Ohio States. So the fact that Indiana was able to retain those guys, I think, is very massively telling. Indiana's issue in any sport has never been money. I believe Indiana had the most profitable athletic department of any college in America in 2024. Again, they just always choose to spend it on basketball and the other non-revenue sports, and basically saying, okay, where most schools are like, all we care about is football. And it was like, great, we can use the revenue that we're making in our Big Ten contract deal and buy more players in the basketball transfer portal and get good, baseball locker rooms and shit. Well, no, further, one of the first things that Cignetti did when he got hired last season was have an NIL fundraising dinner where it was 34 plates were sold at $100,000 a plate. So that was $3.4 million brought in day one. And now how the team looks like, we lost Curtis Rourke. They went out and get Fernando Mendoza, who was a big-time expensive quarterback in the transfer portal. I don't think ever before this when I said, yes, Indiana's going to be a threat to get top 10 QBs in the transfer portal. Let's not forget Curtis Rourke was a Ohio player that was not very highly sought after in the transfer portal last season. Before that, they got Taven Jackson, who was a 4-star at Tennessee, who never played, and had the bonus of being brothers with Trace Jackson Davis, one of the most popular athletes in recent memory at IU. And before that, the quarterbacks that they were getting were like 2 and 3 stars that were generally local. Yep. The one 5-star we ever had even interested in us was Gunnar Kiel, who actually did commit to Indiana at one point because he committed to every school back then. I think he was committed to like 5 or 6 different schools in the pre-transfer portal era, but he didn't even have one practice with the Hoosiers. There were some other guys who were interested, Julian Lewis being the named one recently, but again, that's a Cignetti recruit. So to go out and get Mendoza was huge, and Indiana returns some of the best production in the entire country. The best receiver returns in Elijah Surratt, who's probably the second best receiver in the Big Ten behind Jeremiah Smith. And all 3 of their top defenders, one at each level, Michael Kamara on the D-line, Aiden Fisher at middle linebacker, and D'Angelo Pons at corner. These guys are all preseason All-American defenders. So the talent is certainly there for IU. They did well in the transfer portal. The offensive line looks really solid with Pat Coogan coming in from Notre Dame and Carter Smith returning at left tackle. So I think the sky's the limit for this IU team this year.
Love to hear it. I absolutely love to hear it. When you look at some of the surrounding teams with Indiana, why would you say they are better than, say, a Michigan, USC, and Nebraska, but also worse than an Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State?
So Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State all just have so much more depth than IU, regardless of how much the transfer portal can affect a team and blow you up, as we've seen with Indiana. These guys have been recruiting 4 and 5 stars only for years and years and years and years and years. So like the back of their roster, and once you get outside the top line, is just so much stronger. Even beyond that, again, IU didn't really put up much of a fight against Ohio State. They didn't really put up much of a fight against Notre Dame last season. And while I do expect them to be competitive, it did seem like a very big talent gap in between those programs. And I think IU will hopefully get there. But even with the transfer portal, you still have to like get your program to have years and years and years of bringing in guys that are only going to be 4 and 5 stars, whether that is from high school or in from the portal. And Indiana just still isn't there yet. Why I have them above a team like Michigan, who arguably is on that level where they do have tons of depth at every other position, is I just think, the coaching situation is so much better for Indiana. I am not a fan of Sharon Moore. And I think that obviously since Jim Harbaugh left, like the coaching staff has kind of been a little bit in, I don't want to say shambles, but certainly doesn't compare to like that Harbaugh, Jesse Minter, Mike McDonald core that was a few years ago. And with Michigan having to start a true freshman quarterback, I certainly think IU has the advantage there. But if Underwood does turn out to be like the stud number one quarterback, going to be a future first overall pick, I probably would put Michigan ahead of IU. But until we see that, I can't do it.
Absolutely. And then Nebraska and USC just aren't there in talent, and the coaching situation's worse. So,
Yeah, I would say at this point, IU's talent is pretty equal with Nebraska and USC, maybe even slightly higher if we're just talking about the top end starters. Those two teams might be a little bit deeper, but okay, if we're taking away IU's three best defensive players, the season's basically over anyways. So
exactly. And I agree there on all counts. I think that Penn State, Oregon, and Ohio State are just that much deeper, and their staffs, I would say, are comparable in a way. I love what Penn State has.
They're certainly way more proven. I mean, you can't argue with that. Maybe you could argue Ohio State coordinators are not as proven because this is Hartline's first time being an OC, and who they get, Patricia as a DC. He's mostly been in the NFL. Maybe you could argue he's going to have a tough time adjusting to college. I think people are sleeping on Patricia a little bit. Because I see people talking about it like it's a negative that they have him. And I'm like, well, what planet are you guys living on that he's a negative in a college football coordinator role?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not as high on Patricia as probably a lot of Ohio State people are, but some of the people who think that he's going to be an automatic disaster, that's kind of that's intellectually dishonest too. I mean, with the amount of talent that he has there, I think it's a big advantage on top of the fact that he was a successful defensive coordinator. We'll see. I don't
even really get where the mindset happens. Is it just because of Charlie Weiss? I think Bill O'Brien has been good since he's returned to college. I mean, we've seen a lot of guys go from NFL back to college and be fine. Is it just because Charlie Weiss was so bad and also a Belichick guy?
I think it's a Belichick thing. It's a Lions thing. For whatever reason, people connect the Lions to that. And it's also maybe even a bit of a Wink Martindale thing, where it took him several games to actually command what was a top 10, top 5 defense to that level. In that month of September, the defense was truly bad with the talent that was on it. I mean, Texas casually tore them apart in a way that they didn't with any other defense the whole year. USC was playing the wrong quarterback, and at that point probably didn't figure out their run game, and if not for Miller Moss being Miller Moss, they probably win. Minnesota nearly came back on them, and Minnesota's offense was very limited. And Michigan.
Oh, I remember that USC game. I had bet on USC that game, and I was so pissed. Wasn't that the game where they had a 60-yard run at the very end of it?
They executed a 2-minute drill.
Yeah, 2-minute drill without throwing the football.
By spamming halfback dive.
Now I'm remembering that game, and I was so pissed as a USC bettor in that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was I was in disbelief personally. It was a pretty incredible watch there. But yeah, Michigan's staff, that's something I'm concerned about this year. Looking at it, I think if they had a better staff, I'd be much more confident in their placement. With Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon on top of them, I think having better rosters than Michigan. Starting wise, that combined with staffs puts them in
I know who Michigan needs to bring in too.
Who?
There's one man for the job. They need to bring him in at offensive coordinator, Mr. Connor Stallions. It has to be done. It has to be done. It's an inevitability that he'll be back at some point.
Oh, I hope that he is several hundred miles away from the program for forever. It's very, very tragic. Just all that has transpired with that whole thing. With the NCAA, that will probably take until September or maybe October now for the final ruling to come down. Can you remember anything that's ever taken that long to get resolved?
I don't think so, because even the Reggie Bush Heisman, I think, was pretty quick, and that seems to be one of the more bigger controversies. I wasn't around for the SMU death penalty, so I could only go off of whatever documentaries. But for what seems to be a pretty cut and dry case, it certainly is taking a long time. Yes.
Yeah, that's very intriguing. If any of you guys have questions later in this show, I am going to be doing a question and answer session here. So whether it's a super chat or not a super chat, feel free to send in your questions, and I'll scroll down the chat when the time is appropriate, and we'll get to answering those. Before we do that, though, are there any... Well, actually, before we get to the intriguing storylines, looking at Indiana's schedule, you have the 3 cupcake non-conference games, Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State. But then you have Illinois, got Iowa on the road, Oregon on the road off of a nicely placed bye, Michigan State and UCLA at home, Maryland and Penn State as back-to-back road games. Then you close out the slate with Wisconsin at home, and then off the bye, you play Purdue on the road in kind of a Friday night game, which I think is kind of cool. Which games would you classify as trap games, and what would be your outlook for Indiana in those big games, like Oregon on the road, Penn State on the road?
I can't even call those trap games. I mean, early bet spreads are out for them. Indiana is a 16.5-point underdog to Penn State and a 13.5-point underdog to Oregon. It actually was 14.5. So the line is moving a little bit in favor of Indiana. But, I mean, trap games I feel like are ones you got to think that you have a good chance of winning and then you blow. As an IU fan, maybe if these games were at home, I could try to talk myself into it. It's very, very difficult for me to see as stands right now going into Oregon or into Happy Valley and getting the job done. And you know, I would love to see it, but still, even if you go back to IU schedule last season, the biggest win was, or at least the best team they beat was probably Michigan or Washington. And obviously this was one of the worst Michigan teams we've seen in recent memory. That was also a close game. That was probably a little bit closer than it should have been. So I need to see Indiana beat one of the more elite teams before I'm willing to say that I think they can win those 2 games. So I would look at the trap games as being the Illinois game and the Iowa game, both pretty early on in the season.
That's what I meant by the trap games, by the way. I'm very well aware that Oregon and Penn State are massive favorites for good reason.
Yeah, exactly, for good reasons. The Illinois game I feel a little bit better about. I'm not as high on Illinois as I think a lot of the general public is. I've seen a lot of people being like, oh, Illinois is this year's Indiana. I mean, first of all, Illinois went to a bowl game last season, went 9-3, and beat a ranked South Carolina. Indiana the previous year went 3-9 and lost to, like, who did we even lose to that year? I know we had a really bad loss.
You beat Akron in overtime. And
yeah,
Akron
we almost blew that.
awful.
We should have lost that game 100%. I think we need a 4th down conversion in overtime or something. But yeah, like Indiana went 3-9 the year before. Illinois is going to be a good team. They returned Luke Altmaier. They got Brett Bielema, but I don't think they're going to be A, as strong as they were last season, and B, everyone seems to have a target on them. But being at home, you know, with coming off of a few cupcakes, I think it'll be a big test because last season, Indiana had no ego. There was no player on the team that was like, oh, yeah, we're going to come in and win. You know, maybe after the Michigan game where it's like, okay, we're 10-0 and ranked in the top 5. Like, okay, maybe you're going to start getting a little bit ahead of yourself. But now with a full offseason of, hey, we've made the playoffs, we're preseason ranked, everyone has big expectations for us. After you have a few big wins, you say, oh, we're as good as everyone says we are. We're going back to the playoffs. And then you have to go in against a tough team that plays hard-nosed football. But I also think that Cignetti is a good enough coach to be able to get his teams past that. I mean, Cignetti, yes, he was a big-time, like, D2 coach and in mid-majors, but this is also a guy who was at Alabama, who was worked directly under Nick Saban. He was the recruiting coordinator at Bama during their big national championship run. This is the guy who was the lead recruiter on Julio Jones and Derrick Henry. Like, he knows how to deal with big-time athletes and big-time egos. And I think he's going to get these guys ready to go. So then maybe the Iowa game is probably the bigger trap where it's like, okay, you've gotten past Illinois. Okay, we got through the trap game. Now you're going on the road. You got Oregon the following game. You're a little bit more focused on that because if they beat Illinois and they're 4-0 with a win over Illinois, at that point you're likely in the top 15, if not top 10, depending on who else loses in front of you. Because Indiana, you know, depending on the rankings, I see them kind of anywhere between like 12 and 25. They're 12 and 20 preseason, maybe in the back of the top 5 or back of the top 25. But I think it'll be probably a little bit higher than that. So again, like they'll be pretty highly ranked at that point, maybe looking ahead to Oregon. So I'd say probably Iowa's the biggest trap game, especially because we don't even know how Iowa's offense is going to be with a new offensive coordinator in there.
Yeah, that's going to be extremely fascinating looking at Iowa and Mark Gronowski. Tim Lester, I think, did a pretty good job last year with Iowa, but Mark Gronowski is a much better quarterback than either Cade McNamara or Brendan Sullivan.
Did you see the
So,
clip that was blowing up on Twitter of him throwing like an 8-yard rolling out pass?
yes, because
The
Iowa
Iowa's got
hasn't
a
been
new
able to do
QB, and it's
that.
just like him throwing like an 8-yard out.
Yeah, I mean, Deacon Hill couldn't do that.
That's
McNamara
for
couldn't do
sure.
it.
That's for sure.
I don't think
Brandon Sullivan
Sullivan
couldn't
could
do
do
that.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. And if their defense can figure out secondary better than they did last year, I think that could be an absolutely a dangerous team. What would be your expectations for this team? They bring in Rourke, or not Rourke, but Mendoza. They've upgraded the offensive line. They return Surratt. They've upgraded at running back, and the defense returns enough and brings in enough through the portal to where they should be good as well. So what would be a success, a disappointment, and what do you think is kind of that line between those?
It's just so crazy, my answer this season, because it's just so vastly different from my answer every other season of ever being an Indiana fan. Even going into last year, what would my answer have been? Make a bowl game is a success. And now with this year, it's like, I don't want to necessarily say it's playoffs or bust, but you already made the playoffs in year one. This is Indiana. We as fans are very demanding of our program because this is one of the biggest schools in the country, one of the biggest athletic departments. We have a ton of resources. We expect to win, especially with basketball having not won a championship since the late 80s, not been to a Final Four since 2002. I think a lot of people are starting to say, okay, maybe the football team is going to bring us to success, and now we're expecting a lot. So I think 10-2 as anything above 10-2 is an unmitigated success. It's like build Cignetti the statue, lock him in for a 15-year deal at $15 million a year. Like, okay, this is good to go. Otherwise, I think it's like if Indiana can go 10-2, that's the top end of expectations. Where it's like I think that's where most of our fans are thinking like, okay, we made the playoffs last season. The team looked great. We've brought in a bunch of guys. We're pumping a lot of money in. We've kept our coaches. We should be able to beat both Illinois and Iowa. We should be able to beat Michigan State. We should be able to beat UCLA, Maryland, Wisconsin, Purdue. We can lose to Oregon and Penn State. That's fine. Nobody is reasonably expecting Indiana to win those games. So 10-2 is like the very satisfied, good result of this, even if it's missing the playoffs, which I don't believe would be the case. I think a 10-2 Indiana with only losses being at Oregon and at Penn State would make the playoffs, especially if one of those is by like 3 or 7 and was like a hyper competitive game.
Yes.
That, they blew at the end, or, Oregon had a great 2-minute drill to win the game or something. If they go 8-4, I would say that's kind of like the bare minimum expectations where it's like, okay, you lost the 2 games there. Maybe you lose to Iowa, you blow something else, Illinois, Michigan State. But anything under 8-4 is like, okay, what's happening here? I've seen this, the Back to the Future. I've seen that one. Like, I've seen this one before. And then if they miss a bowl game, it's like panic mode. This is a complete unmitigated failure. We need to reassess. We need to fire Cignetti and promote one of the coordinators. I don't think it's going to go necessarily that far, and I don't really see that happening. So I would say it's kind of like 9 wins is the, okay, good season. We probably are going to make a top bowl game but miss the playoffs. 10 wins, okay, we should have made the playoffs, so we missed the playoffs. We can complain about the committee being biased or whatever. 8 wins is like, all right, this is the low expectations moving forward. We need to be above 8 wins moving forward, and then anything less is like, yeah, this is what happened here.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that 11-1 this year would be so much more impressive than last year because you're repeating what many almost understandably think was a little bit of a fluke last year. You're repeating that, saying that, hey, this isn't a fluke, we can do this again. And you would be beating one of the elite teams. You'd either go on the road and beat Oregon, or you'd go on the road and beat Penn State, which is something that last year's team, I think safe to say, was probably incapable of doing, looking at those 2 games. And then, yeah, I think 10-2 would also be phenomenal. Not quite as phenomenal, but Indiana hasn't had ever a back-to-back double-digit win campaign where for 2 seasons in a row you win 10 or more games.
How many times have they had even double digits, period? Last year was the first one since I've been a fan, because even the other best year was a shortened season.
Yeah, it was that was the first. It was the first time they ever won 10 or more games, and they skipped 10, went straight to 11.
There you go, right. I was saying maybe there was a year with like Randall Ellis quarterback, in the late 90s that they did it, but Yeah, I think that was like our first double-digit win season. Insane.
Yeah, absolutely crazy.
Which is then even crazy that it's like, okay, we did it for the first time ever. Now the expectation is go out and go do it right back.
Yeah,
Yep.
but like you said, they're pouring money in. I mean,
Yep.
how were they able to get some of those transfers that I know other Power Four schools wanted? Like
Yep.
Kellen Wyatt and Roman Hemby came from the same roster that Levon Johnson did, and Texas poached him. Like he entered the portal in Texas. Like, nope, you're coming here, you're coming to Austin, and Texas is right now, I would say, the premier recruiting program
For
nationally.
sure.
Like they are the number one NIL, number one in high school recruiting deal. And for Indiana to get good players from Power Four caliber rosters and then to retain their staff and retain players on their roster that were phenomenal is, yeah, it proves your point that the school's invested, which is
Yeah,
good.
I would be very confident in saying that from 2024 to 2025, the program who is raising their budget the most is Indiana. I'd be very confident saying that.
Absolutely. I mean, they paid handsomely for several of those players and definitely gave them raises too after a phenomenal campaign. I mean, who thought that they would beat both Washington and Michigan and then everyone else on their schedule except Ohio State? It's crazy.
I mean, again, going into the season last year, most people would have said who's going to win between Indiana and Maryland? Probably Maryland. Who's going to win between Indiana and Nebraska? Nebraska. Indiana, Michigan State? Michigan State. Like, it wasn't even a question to be picking those other teams.
Absolutely. What is your prediction for Indiana? I know their win total is 8.5 right now on FanDuel. I think on most sites it's 8.5, and I think they're favorites over everyone except those Oregon Penn State games where they're double-digit dogs, and maybe they're an underdog to Iowa. What's your prediction for the Hoosiers?
Yeah, I don't think there's an early Iowa Indiana line, but I would guess Indiana would be a short favorite in that game as of now. And I do predict Indiana to go 10-2. I do think they're going to win every game besides the Oregon and Penn State games. And I think there will be one of those games against one of those top two programs that Indiana does compete very well in, probably against Oregon, but I still think it's going to be maybe like a 34-27 type Oregon win.
Yeah, that's the one I would pick to be competitive too. I was so close. In fact, at one point I did have that as an Indiana win, but then when the spread got released and I looked back at the talent differential, it's just it's so wide. And Oregon will have enough games to figure it out and be coming off of a bye. Likely will be coming off a Penn State loss to kind of to garner the locker room, to gather support, and I just decided, hey, I have to kind of see it to believe it in a sense.
And
Not
one of the
saying it's
things with
impossible.
Indiana last season also was their offense was amazing, but I believe a lot of it had to do with being the scheme more so than the players. Because what really seemed to haunt them was when they went against these defenses, they just had way more talent than them. Like the Ohio State, Michigan, and Notre Dame games, Indiana's offense looked incredibly different than virtually every other game. Even you could argue the Washington game as well, though that mostly has to do with Curtis Rourke getting hurt and not playing the second half of that game. Still, I think that's going to be the main issue is that when Indiana's going against a team that they can't out scheme because the other team has talent to make up for maybe the difference in coaching. Of course, Oregon is also an incredibly coached team as well. But I think when Indiana has either a coaching or talent advantage, they're basically dominating opponents. And when they can't make up for either one of those or even both, that's when they've really been struggling, especially on the defensive side, because it feels like regardless, I mean, I think the defense is actually the strength of the Indiana team in terms of talent, but the offensive scheme is clearly one of the best in the country.
Yeah, you saw that, especially since in the Notre Dame and Ohio State game, I thought the defense played just as well as it usually did. I mean, they held
The Notre
Ohio
Dame
State.
game was insane. I was at the game, so I don't have the benefit of like watching on TV and hearing what the announcer said. But what it seemed happened to me was work through that pick on the first drive. And then from then on, the coaching staff was just too terrified to call passes down the field because they're like, okay, this team is just better than us on the defensive line. They're getting too much pressure, so we can't call these deep passes. Their corners and safeties are obviously playing well enough and have watched film that they're going to be, ahead of these routes. So it just felt like they kind of gave up on the downfield pass, because that first drive, Indiana was moving the ball pretty well up until the interception, and then it just felt like they kind of gave up almost to an extent after that.
Yeah, I remember watching that game on the TV, and outside of that one long run by Love for Notre Dame, Indiana actually ran the football better.
And that one run was the play after the interception. So I think that's what happened. It was like Indiana, because I think Indiana got a turnover on downs or a 3 and out or whatever. They got the stop on the first drive, and then they're moving down the field. They threw the pick, give up the 98-yard touchdown, and then at that point it was almost like shell shock. It was like, oh, like holy God, what are we gonna do?
Yeah. In Indiana's problem last year, I think their biggest problem against Ohio State and Notre Dame and even Michigan is just they couldn't match pound for pound athleticism. They couldn't do it. Now, on the defensive line, they finished with the number 1 run defense in college football. Again, easy schedule, but the defense, I think, just due to the nature of defense versus offense, it's much easier, as Iowa has shown, to adapt from a talent disadvantage and still perform at a high level on defense than it is to do so on offense. So with Surratt coming back, but then especially Mendoza coming in, since he's viewed, I know that some people have given him, day 2, day 1 NFL grades in the future. It'll be interesting to see if maybe that can help them take the next step there. Iowa on the road's no easy task, so I think that will be even Illinois at home, with how experienced Illinois is, those games, those 2 trap games will be a big moment of opportunity.
Absolutely. It'll be interesting to see, but I do believe that the first 3 games of the Big Ten schedule will be very telling, because there is a chance IU could be 0-3 after those games, and that's when the doom and gloom will start to set in for the IU fans, which I've only experienced far too many times.
Absolutely. All right. We've talked about Indiana here. Before we get to any questions, and for those of you listening, type your questions in the live chat, and we'll get to them. Before we move on to that, what interesting storylines in college football this year are you following, whether for a player or a team? It can be anything.
So I think the main player storyline you got to be following is Arch Manning, right? He's the number 1 overall recruit in his high school class. He goes to Texas, where he knew he would have to sit for a few years. You could argue they forced Quinn Ewers out. He did have an extra year of eligibility remaining. He decided to pass on all of that altogether to go to the NFL and give up what probably would have been a $5-6 million NIL contract in exchange for a $750,000 NFL 7th round deal. Don't know who was advising him on that one. I know he said, I wanted to be remembered as a Texas Longhorn, and I didn't want to go to, I think Oregon was kind of the main rumor that was out there that they were trying to get him. If I were him, I probably would have gone to Oregon, but that's just me. But now Arch is the undisputed leader. He's the undisputed quarterback there. It's his time to shine. His grandfather, Archie Manning, came out and said a couple days ago, he's staying for 4 years. So it doesn't seem like he's going to be a one and done. I had a theory for a while, actually, that Arch was not interested in playing college football, period. And I thought that was why he chose Texas, because he could hide on the bench for 2 years and play a little bit of his junior year, kind of do the Nick Bosa thing where it's like, oh, I suffered a aggravation to my hamstring. I'm out for 3 months now because of it. And oh, what a coincidence. I'm going to the draft and going to the top 5 after this. But I don't think that's the case. And, certainly it doesn't make sense money-wise. He doesn't need the money. His family is one of the richest families in the country, let alone comparing him to average Joe who needs the NIL deal. Not to mention he's making a rumored $10 million, $12 million NIL to begin with. He's allegedly the highest paid player in college football anyways. So, I want to see how is Texas going to do with him. They just made it to the playoffs the last 2 seasons in both a 14 playoff and a 12-team playoff with Ewers. And now with Arch coming in, he's the favorite for the Heisman. Texas is likely being preseason ranked number 1. If not, if they win that game against Ohio State, which all eyes will be on him in week 1. So seeing how he does, how he leads Texas, and, is he the guy that everyone thinks he can be as hey, this guy could be the next great quarterback. I think that's got to be the top storyline amongst college football this year.
Absolutely. I think that what I'm curious to see is we know he's more talented than Ewers. I think that's certain. but how will he lead the team, and what will he be able to do in terms of changing the plays or making the necessary adjustments that Ewers was able to make? And also there's the story of, does he have the same supporting cast? I mean, they lost most of their offensive line from last year. They lost their best wide receiver in Matthew Golden, their best tight end in Gunnar Helm. They do bring back an injured running back in C.J. Baxter, and Wisner was a 1,000-yard rusher, but their running back room was not exactly the strength of the team last year. And their schedule is, while one of the easiest in the SEC, it's one of the toughest nationally. I mean, you got to play Ohio State, Florida, and Georgia on the road, and then Oklahoma neutral field and A&M at home. None of those are easy tasks whatsoever. Would you pick him to win the Heisman, or who would you pick it? Someone else?
I would not pick Arch, mostly because of the odds. I don't think he has proven anything that he should be viewed as the favorite right now, and you're getting a really bad price for it. If you were to take odds off the table, I'd be a lot more likely to, but still probably not, given that this is his first season as a full-time starter. We don't necessarily know what to expect from him. We've seen mainly a lot of great things on the ground with him running the football. So that is not going to be a surprise to anybody. Every team is going to be preparing to deal with Arch Manning runs and QB spies and all that situation to prevent him from busting out big games as well, which should hopefully be better for his pass opportunities if they're devoting resources to stopping his run. And that's resources they can't devote to guarding the guys down the field. But with Texas going to have a huge target on their back, I just don't think the value is there at all for Arch. And with it being his first year, I don't think I would take a stab on that.
Absolutely. I think that Cade Klubnik at Clemson, I would venture that, honestly, I'd venture that whoever starts at quarterback for Ohio State, I'm pretty confident that's Julian Sayin. There are so many quarterbacks, I think, that just from a schematic standpoint or them having the wide receivers would put up better numbers and therefore be invited. Like, I would even, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I almost think that Carson Beck with an easier ACC schedule and more experience, I kind of think like, yeah, I mean, we know that these committees don't always watch the games or weigh strength of schedule a ton. And I'm not exactly the biggest defender of the SEC. I mean, Alabama was left out for a reason. You can't score only 3 points against Oklahoma and expect to be taken as a serious national championship contender.
And the committee was dead right as they lost to fucking Michigan, who didn't play any of their best players.
Yeah. Yeah, it was awful. I mean, Michigan physically kicked their rear in the trenches with their backups, nonetheless.
Yeah. I one of my most confident bets of 2025, now, let's not forget, this was January 1st, 2025, was Alabama over Michigan. I don't want to tell you in the stream how much money I lost on that game. It almost was a beginning and ending of the betting for the year just on the first day because of how bad Jalen Milroe was. And he will never live it down. I will be happy to fade him in every NFL game he plays in moving forward, because that man is not a winning football player.
No, he is not. What happened last year is down the stretch, it became clear that defenses could very easily decipher who he was, what he wanted to do, and what the staff would let him do. And the Oklahoma game was so bad. I remember him throwing it right to, I think it was Kip Lewis. Like he didn't just throw a bad pass or didn't see him. He threw it right to him as if he was the receiver, and that's what led to the 24 to nothing score. Was the two awful picks that set up touchdowns. And in the Michigan game, he turned it over, I think, 3 times in the first quarter?
Yeah, in the first quarter. In football recruiting, when it comes to quarterbacks, they're listed in one of two categories: pocket passer or dual threat. Jalen Milroe is in a category that I have invented myself. And you know who was the founding member of this category? The newest Michigan wide receiver, Donovan McCulley, former Indiana quarterback. There's a third category of players that I call a single threat. They are not dual threats. They are single threats. All they can do is run. They have no passing ability whatsoever. These are guys like Donovan McCulley, who was transferred to becoming a receiver, guys like Jalen Milroe, guys like Alex Orji, a true single threat quarterback. Now you used to actually be able to win back in the day with single threat quarterbacks with big option schemes. I don't want to insult Tommy Frazier by comparing him to guys like that, but he certainly wasn't throwing the football a lot. It was a lot of wishbone and option run and stuff like that. But in today's day and age, you can't really be a single threat unless you're playing at a military academy.
Yeah. That's what Michigan's quarterback room was. It was a bunch of service academy QBs, and then Davis Warren was 1-2, except he had no legs. He was a zero.
Davis Warren was a walk-on quarterback who never intended to play a game. He was like just trying to have his backup dreams be fulfilled. He can get the hot chicks, being like, I'm on the team. Get all the perks. But same with Jack Tuttle. That was actually Jack Tuttle. And when he had to play, that was like he immediately retired after like 2 starts. He's like, I did not come here to play.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that Illinois game was so bad last year, where Michigan outgained Illinois by, I think, that's another reason why all of you shouldn't be high on Illinois. The fact that Michigan, before they figured everything out, was able to outgain Illinois by 100 yards on their own home field should tell you the quality of the players they're bringing back. And then Michigan just turned it over a bunch in the red zone, and Illinois didn't, because Altmaier's an actual, real good quarterback. And that was the loss. I'm going to use that term, the one threat quarterback. I'm curious to see.
I gave it. That was my nickname for McCulley for years when he was the IU quarterback. I literally would text my friends and I would say, "Oh, the single threat is back."
The single.
He couldn't throw the ball, and now it's just I use it for any category of quarterback who can't throw and can only run.
Is that Anthony Richardson in the NFL, or not quite?
Richardson is, he shows like bursts of talent. And he still does make some crazy throws, but he's just so inconsistent. I hesitate to call him that because the ability's there. He just can't unlock it versus a guy like Milroe or Orji who have no ability to begin with.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Milroe and Orji and McCulley just never had any of those moments. I mean, I even remember Milroe at Alabama when he averaged over 10 yards per attempt in 2023. That was just that was all scheme, or his wide receivers making phenomenal catches. Like there was never this pass that he threw that was like, oh my gosh, like it was just perfect in every way. I'm hoping that whether it's like Bryce Underwood at Michigan or maybe Malik Washington at Maryland, those are some young players who are starting, that like they can immediately show out that they have arm talent and leg talent. I think they will. I'm kind of shell-shocked after last year's quarterback situation.
I don't think any quarterback situation can get as bad as Michigan 2024. I feel like we'll look back in 10 years and be comparing every current shitty quarterback situation to, oh yeah, it's like that Michigan year post-national championship. I truly believe that was as bleak as it gets for any program, especially a big-time program. And honestly, the fact that Brycen Moore became head coach and didn't immediately address that and say, we need to get a guy in the portal,
that's crazy.
Or that he like looked at these guys and said they're good enough to win, it is almost enough reason to fire him as is, to say, how could you have mismanaged this so badly at fucking Michigan? I mean, could they not have got Curtis Rourke? I tend to think they probably could beat out IU for Rourke if they wanted him.
Yeah, that's something I was actually just thinking about today. I was texting someone saying, imagine if Cignetti and his staff brought over Rourke and maybe a few of their better players to Michigan last year on top of the talent they already have. Besides Texas,
if Cignetti went to Michigan and brought in and did nothing different, just bringing the same guys, Michigan's an undefeated national champion again.
Really?
Without a doubt. Look what they did without Indiana. You're saying basically Michigan's defensive line, who already had Kenneth Grant, who already had Mason Graham, is now adding Michael Kamara to it. Their linebacking core, which is already strong, you're adding Aiden Fisher. You're having Will Johnson and D'Angelo Pons on the outside. And then you're adding the offense was fine. The receivers were never amazing. You're adding Elijah Surratt, who would have been the number one receiver. You are adding in Rourke at quarterback. If you just only brought in Rourke, they make the playoffs and potentially win it. If that's the only change from last season, is just bringing in Rourke, let alone all the other talents.
Oh yeah. Now I can see it, especially defensively. That probably would have been maybe to start, you still have the rough transition, but at the end of the year, that would functionally be the best defense. I mean, you could not run, because you're also thinking they bring in CJ West too.
The Michigan defense without those guys already beat the national champions in Ohio State.
Yeah. Now
you're adding in those super talented guys.
Yeah, you're adding in Kamara and then CJ West, who Michigan actually wanted. And boom, like now you have the deepest and best starting defensive line. Your linebacker, yeah, exactly. Like, and that's what is so maddening about the whole Michigan deal, is if they just had a competent quarterback last year, they win 9 games or 10. If they were able to get a much better coaching player.
Honestly, they didn't even need a competent quarterback. They just need a non-negative quarterback.
Yeah. So if they had Cade McNamara from 2021, they probably win an additional game or 2.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, McNamara looks like fucking Tom Brady compared to Davis Warren.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, what if they had Bryce Underwood, like this year's version of Bryce Underwood last year? I'm not saying
they had Mikey Keene last year. Like, not even Bryce Underwood. What if they had the backup quarterback from this year? I like Mikey Keene at Fresno State. I think he was fine.
Yeah. What if they? I mean, how deep down the rabbit hole could you go? I mean, what if last year's Michigan had John O'Korn? Is John O'Korn better? It probably is better than Davis Warren or Alex Orji. I can't even.
We're talking John O'Korn now or John O'Korn from 15 years ago?
John O'Korn from forever ago. Even now
he's still better.
It was so awful. Oh my gosh. I hope that we never have to see any of those players ever again. I hope Michigan never has to roll out Jake Garcia, even as a backup. I just want it to be done and over with. What would you? I know you mentioned this when I came on your show. Yet Michigan pegged it, 8-4, 9-3. What do you think would be their floor, and what would be their ceiling?
So the ceiling is interesting because I think a lot of it depends on Bryce Underwood. It's always very risky to go with a true freshman. But if this guy does turn out to be the truth, if he does turn out to be like one of the better QBs in the country, they could very legitimately go 10-2, 11-1, maybe even 12-0. I mean, they get Ohio State at home, which is obviously a huge advantage for Michigan. While I do think this Ohio State team is certainly better than Michigan, that was obviously the case last year, and Michigan still won. Ryan Day has had a huge issue with beating Michigan, and going into the Big House is only going to make it that much more difficult. And then the other, the rest of the games is like the home schedule was pretty easy, all things considered. It's really the Oklahoma, Nebraska, USC road games that you have to worry about. And I'm definitely concerned about a true freshman's ability to go on the road that early in the season, especially with Michigan not having more for the Nebraska game. But again, if Underwood is like an elite dog who's throwing for like 250 yards a game, there's a very feasible chance they could win all of those. So I would say the floor for Michigan is, probably 8-4, because no matter what, the quarterback room is not going to be worse than last season. Even if Underwood is bad, he's still better than Warren and Orji. And even if they have to go to Mikey Keene, he's still better than all those guys too. And as we saw with that USC game last year, they were still a talented enough program to win games, even if they get literally nothing from the QB position. So it would be tough for me to see them losing to any of the home games. Maybe outside of Ohio State, obviously.
Yes.
Like you could maybe argue Washington if Washington is on the up and up, which I know a lot of people are believing in. I think Michigan will probably end up beating this Washington team. And then it's like, okay, what's going to happen on the road? Sure, Michigan State is a threat because this is a huge rivalry game. And again, we've seen better Michigan teams lose to worse Michigan State teams, like when that blocked punt returned for the touchdown off the punter's foot. But still, I would say that like worst case scenario for Michigan is probably 8-4, where they lose to they lose to Ohio State, they lose to Oklahoma, and then lose 2 out of 3 to Nebraska, USC, and Michigan State. I still don't see them going 0-3 in that spot. I guess that would be like the roof is falling type scenario for Michigan, where it's like, all right, we lose 4 road games and Ohio State and go 7-5, and then Moore's probably fired anyways.
Yeah, at that point you pull the plug, because this is going to be Michigan's easiest schedule for a long time. And you don't play Penn State, you don't play Oregon, you don't play Indiana. Yes, you get USC on the road, but you get Ohio State at home. Well, they get worse and have new coordinators. You upgrade your coordinators and your home, and you have a mental edge. And then Oklahoma on the road, it sure isn't easy, but sometimes having those games can, give you some gumption and help you assess where you're at. And it's not the 4-team CFP or the BCS anymore. You can afford 1 or 2 losses, and especially if you're a brand like Michigan, Michigan can lose all their, they can lose their 2 biggest games and get in because they're Michigan with 10 wins. Like if Alabama got 10 wins last year and looked just as bad as they did, they would have gotten in no matter what, even if they looked awful and everyone was saying, hey, they're not going to escape out of the first round. So I agree. I think they can go undefeated. I might have their floor a little bit lower just because I think that the bottom could fall out. But this is a team that could win the Big Ten and could certainly probably win a game in the playoffs. I would not peg them as a national title contender just because of the wide receiver room, some of the questions on the offense overall, the youth of Underwood, the offensive tackle situation, and defensive back may be the least talented that we've seen in a little bit. But they have talent. They are a top 15 power rated team almost unanimously in the preseason, with the potential to be top 10. Any other exciting storylines or teams that you're really paying attention to this year before we move on to the question and answer session? Everyone, make sure to ask questions.
There's definitely a few storylines and teams I'm looking at. You mentioned Carson Beck earlier. I'm definitely paying attention to Miami. I'm very high on Miami this season, partly because of Carson Beck. I think he's been getting kind of an unfair rap, taking a lot of the blame for Georgia. Like, God forbid he doesn't win the national championship, right? Like, that seems like, oh, well, Stetson Bennett won twice. It's like the Iron Man, right? Tony Stark did this with a box of scraps. Like, okay, yeah, sorry that Carson Beck didn't win the national championship, but he's still a pretty good damn quarterback. Miami's schedule is really not that bad. They play Notre Dame at home week 1. Notre Dame breaking in a brand new quarterback. That's a very winnable game. And they don't have to play Clemson in the regular season. And so, the Mario Cristobal situation of it all is certainly something I'm paying attention to. Like, it feels kind of like a must-win season for Miami where it's almost playoffs or bust. And I could see them firing Cristobal if they don't make the playoffs. I'm also taking a look at Bill Belichick, of course, at North Carolina, seeing what happens there. I think that could be an absolute shit show, but maybe he'll figure it out. And, the issue is it seems like he's mostly took that job to secure his son to be the coach in waiting, and maybe so that his girlfriend can be on like a reality show. But it doesn't necessarily seem like he took it because he's super passionate about leading North Carolina to a national championship. That's kind of like a secondary aspect to him. So very interested in seeing how that goes with the whole situation there. Speaking of, cult of personality coaches, very excited to hear that Dion is going to be coaching and is cancer-free. So Colorado's a team that I'm very high on this year. I love what they did in the offseason. Yes, they lost Shedeur. Yes, they lost Travis Hunter. But I really like Caden Salter, the QB they brought in. And they massively, massively, massively upgraded their offensive line. Their offensive line was the worst in football last season. And that's why Shedeur was always running around and I think he was like the most sacked quarterback in the country last season or close to it. So I think they're going to be maybe like a little bit underrated because, okay, they've lost their 2 big name guys in Hunter and Sanders, but I think they could be a much better team and in a very, very winnable Big 12 conference. So I'm taking a look at all those storylines. Nebraska is another team I'm paying very close attention to. I think that this is a team that could break through and potentially even make the playoffs. They have an easy schedule. They have a good young quarterback who should take the leap. They're bringing in Dana Holgerson as their offensive coordinator. So it should be a much more up-tempo attack. So those are probably some of the main teams and storylines I'm looking out for. I mean, of course, I'm interested in things like, how will Ohio State and Notre Dame respond after making the national championship with new quarterbacks? Same with Alabama. They're bringing a new quarterback. They just missed the playoffs. Saban's not walking through that door. Like, is it going to be the start of a downhill trend for Bama, or is DeBoer going to figure it out? I think there's a lot of great storylines going on in college football this season.
I love to hear it, especially about Colorado. So I have been somewhat of a known anti-Shedeur Sanders person. I'm not exactly just big on him. I think it started when Fox and everyone were basically like glowing over him, glowing him up. Maybe that's a term that I just invented, but it's just so insane watching them say all these things. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, yes, I mean, he has some talent, but he's not Joe Burrow. Like, stop. I remember they had this CBS Sports, I think, at this post saying, what would the spread be between 2023 Colorado and 2019 LSU? And at that point, I'm
LSU
thinking
minus 34.5.
Higher. I'd say minus 42. Like, it would not be close. And
right. LSU would be up 35 at halftime at a minimum in that game.
Yes, they could be up 35-0 playing check down Charlie, like running the same play through the pass and the same play on the ground. But I've liked Deion Sanders.
It would have been more fun is just them playing how just throw a bomb every single play. Chase first down, Jefferson second down, Chase third down, Jefferson fourth down. Just all right, you got to play off to catch your breath. We'll throw a bomb to the other guy.
Yeah. They could run 4 verts every play, like in the NCAA 14 joke, and score, like at least every other time. But their trench play should be much better than it was last year. I mean, bringing back Seton and that offensive line, and Livingston at defensive coordinator did a really good job last year. He comes back for year 2, and you typically see those coordinators make those jumps, as we've talked about, from year 1 to year 2. I expect the same of D'Anton Lynn at USC. I expect Blake Baker at LSU to do that. If you're like Clemson and your defensive coordinator was a pumpkin and you bring in Tom Allen, I expect that in year 1. I think
Tom Allen is a phenomenal defensive coordinator. Like, he was not the right fit for a head coach. And I think a lot of that is because he was maybe a little bit too soft as more of a player's coach, which, again, is not a bad thing. But, like, when you're constantly being like, hey, love each other, love each other, love each other, love each other, well, that's fine. But if we're going 3-9 every year, there's only so much love to go around. Like, it's a great way to be a leader of men and sculpt the vision of the future and all that, but not necessarily for winning football games.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, you have to balance that. And Allen at Penn State, I didn't think did an absolutely awesome job. I mean, maybe I'm tainted just by that one campaign, but I do think that he is in that next tier of defensive coordinators that's like really, really good. Goodwin was a disaster at Clemson, so I would expect them in year one of that era to kind of, it's a pretty whiffed snap, but get it together pretty quickly. For Colorado, yeah, thank you. Yeah, instantly get it together. Colorado, I think, will go from probably being that flashy team to kind of more of a ball control team if they play their cards right. And yeah, I mean, North Carolina, I have no idea what's going to go on there. I happen to think they'll do pretty well because the players they have on defense, but defense isn't the only thing that wins games. If the offense sucks under, I hate saying this, but offensive coordinator Freddie Kitchens, has he even called offensive plays? Do you know?
I don't know. I mean, maybe in the NFL he did. I think maybe for Cleveland he was the OC at one point, but I don't know if he called plays or if the head coach called it.
Yeah, it's a really weird situation. The schedule's easy and the defense being good should help, but there's a lot of variables there. And I'm all over Miami. I think Miami's going to finally make the playoffs. It's another situation of, I know they have a year 1 DC, but Heatherman should be better than Guidry, and they return enough on the O-line, and Beck's competent enough at QB to really, I think, get the ball rolling, especially with where the Notre Dame game is. Notre Dame has more newness and inexperience, and they're playing on the road. So those are 2 things that go in Miami's favor. Now we can get to the questions. I'm going to pop out the chat here. And you all have some pretty good questions, but don't stop sending them in because we have some more time here. This isn't just something that we have to brush through for 5 or 10 minutes and get on out of here. So
yeah, ask all your questions. It doesn't matter the topic. It could be anything college football related. Let us know what your thoughts are.
thank you. Absolutely. If you send a super chat, I appreciate it, and that will probably be at the top of the list. But if my computer will let me, okay, there it goes. We'll really be answering anything that we can. Okay, there for a minute it was spazzing out, but here we are. Okie dokie. All right. MSU #1 fan says, thoughts, Sam, Colorado overhyped. So I think he's asking, is Colorado an overhyped team this year?
I think they're underhyped. I don't really hear anybody talking about them. I mean, what you've heard maybe is some anti-Dion propaganda, but not necessarily talking about the actual team itself. I haven't really heard anybody talk about Caden Salter, again, who I like, and especially the offensive line. I mean, again, it's tough to understate how bad the offensive line was even the last 2 seasons. And with how many guys they brought in the portal, it has no choice but to be better. So if anything, I think they're underhyped.
I'd completely agree with that. I think their win total's what is it, 5.5 or 6.5?
I believe 5.5.
Yeah, I think they're a bowl team, and it's not exactly at the worst, but even though they haven't recruited extremely well at high school, what they do a good job doing is they get like a lot of talented players from other schools that just didn't pan out or weren't going to play. And they bring them in and they give them an opportunity, and they also pair them with some proven guys, and they put a team together. And I don't think Dion is a strategic genius, but he knows how to motivate his roster. I think if he didn't have a decent pulse on the roster, they wouldn't have won 9 games last year. I know it was easy schedule. Every team that had a pulse roster-wise and had elite coaching, so Kansas State, BYU, Nebraska, not elite coaching, but similar in talent or better, and then similar or better coaching combination they lost to, but still to go out there and beat all the teams that at the end of the year you look back and say, yeah, they should have won those games, I think speaks to something at that program. The pissed off Ohioan asks, since the game is in Ann Arbor, does Ryan Day have less pressure on him versus it being in Columbus?
No.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. For whatever
listen,
reason.
You see these Ohio State fans who are still pissed they lost last season when they won the fucking national championship. Like, if anything, they're even more pissed. We had a national championship team and you still lost to Michigan? So, no, I don't think there's any less pressure for Ohio State fans at all.
They're the second, or maybe it's not the second. I think a top 4 power-rated Ohio State team in the 21st century could not beat one of the worst Michigan offenses of the 21st century. Like, that absolutely irritates people. And the thing I have to think about as well is what happens, because at least last season, and the Ohio State fans weren't thinking about this after the game, but they already had 10 wins. They were already going to be a lock for the playoffs no matter what. What happens if they lose to, let's say, Texas and or Washington? So you have 1 loss, and then you lose to Penn State. What happens if you enter that game, and if you lose, you're not getting in the playoffs? Because I think most Big Ten teams at 9-3, sin Wisconsin, are out at 9-3. They don't have the SEC schedule. It would depend
on the other teams around them. Like, who are they competing with for those last spots? Where it may be a similar situation where it's like, well, you got Alabama last year with the big name brand versus a lower tier. And maybe it's like, well, we'll give Ohio State the benefit of the doubt. You know, they won the championship last year. Like, they lose to Texas and Penn State in this scenario, who, if that's the case, Texas and Penn State are probably both getting buys in the playoffs. So it's like, okay, like, they lost to the 2 best teams in the country. And then maybe it would also depend on Michigan. But I actually think 9-3 from an elite Big Ten brand, and that's the key word here, brand, should still be enough to get you in.
Yes, absolutely, depending on the field. Where I was going with this is, if you enter with that record, that game is a pressure cooker might even be a bigger one than last year, especially if Michigan is better and you're not this 20-point favorite where everyone's expecting you to win. Like, talk about pressure.
There's also potential for that game where, let's say Oregon and Penn State, in this example, they're in. Let's say Indiana goes 10-2 with those 2 losses. Well, they would be in at that point. And so there's a scenario where, let's say it's like an 8-3 Mich versus a 9-2 Ohio State. This could be almost like a de facto playoff game where you win and you're in. Because if you have whichever team has the win on their resume over the others, well, it's like, okay, Texas lost to Michigan lost to like Oklahoma and Nebraska, and maybe in that scenario, those are only 2 losses, maybe USC, but then they beat Ohio. It's like there's a very good chance that game could be like a de facto win and get in game, especially if Ohio State loses to Texas.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing about days no longer under pressure, the minute they lose a game, that fantasy's over. Like, poof, gone. The minute that happens, because that's
the pressure might not be like, oh, we want to fire Ryan Day, but he's still going to have the fan base like, at his throat. It's, so I guess like, is his job on the line this year? No. Okay, fine. His job is not on the line for this season, but there's certainly a ton of pressure on him. Yes.
Yeah, it's competitive pressure. It's the same thing that Alabama's had forever, that Georgia has had forever, and Ohio State. I mean, they have not lost to Michigan in this fashion like before, in livable memory, unless you were around during the Cooper era. And even this was probably it was so bad last year, and the schedule's tough enough for Ohio State this year, and the way, just from my personal angle, the way I've watched like the Ohio State fans react to this whole thing, I don't think there's less pressure on them this year. I mean, maybe if they're undefeated entering it, but even then, that means a lot. So I would say no. But job security pressure, you won't. I don't think you'll have the same recognition of the calls to fire him if they lose again, for example.
There's no scenario where Day gets fired this year. If they somehow went 6-6, I would have to assume there's enough injuries or some explanation that it's just not going to happen. He won the national championship last year. His job is safe for probably 2 to 3 years minimum. And that's honestly kind of crazy to even say. It's like, if you win a national championship, you should have at least 5 years of security, like minimum. But Ohio State fans are crazy, Honestly, all the top programs fans are, because the expectation is to win the championship every single year. And that's not really the case in most sports. Like, if you look at NFL, there's probably maybe 3 or 4 teams, fan bases that are like, okay, if we don't win the Super Bowl this year, the year's a failure. Maybe like Philly or Kansas City or Buffalo. It's like, the top, but like in college football, if you're looking at how many teams would say it's championship or bust, I don't know. Probably Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, Notre Dame, Clemson, Oregon, LSU, like at a minimum, and we can probably continue to go down the list and find a couple others.
Yeah, it's all the blue bloods plus a few new bloods who in the 21st century really put things together, and you probably subtract Nebraska from the blue bloods. That's like 10 schools that really want to at least sniff it, or else they're going to be mad. Right. Another question that we have, Russell and Kevin Chavis, I couldn't quite understand. Well, at least Russell. Kevin Chavis didn't have a question. Thunder Redman asks if Ohio State's offensive line is what do you think about it, essentially? He's asking, is it only dominating in practice because Ohio State's defensive line took a major step back? What are your thoughts on the Ohio State offensive line?
It's tough for me to comment on Ohio State practice film. I haven't really seen too many clips. I do know that the defensive line turnover is certainly something to be, I don't want to say concerned about, but that's certainly, if you're an Ohio State fan, one of your biggest question marks heading into the season is they had one of, if not the best defenses in college football last year, and they lost a lot of guys on that D-line. But, one of the things you also got to keep in mind is, like, iron sharpens iron in college football, especially in practice. So if these defensive linemen are going against the best offensive line or one of the top offensive lines in practice every single day, that's going to only make them better when they get on the field against other teams' offensive lines. So I wouldn't really be too concerned at this point in the year. Like, we haven't even hit the first game yet. So maybe if the defensive line is struggling as we hit, the Texas game, sure, but wouldn't necessarily say like, oh, the clips are out there, the storylines are that, we can't get any pressure. Maybe it's just a sign that you guys have a dominant offensive line.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good, especially with the talent they have on the defensive line and then the experience they have in the offensive line. I kind of trend toward the middle of most things. I think that's the best way to be objective. Yeah, I think we have to wait and see before we exactly know. A comment from, I think, a WITIT official says Dylan Raiola is better than DJ Lagway.
Wait, official. I think it's a pretty hot take amongst the general fan base. I mean, Raiola and Lagway were the top two quarterbacks in last high school class. So if you're going to argue for one over the other, I'm not going to really fight you too hard if you think Raiola is better. Certainly, I think last year on the field, Lagway looked like the better quarterback. I believe Florida went like 6-0 in the games where Lagway was the leading passer.
Yes, they did.
But Raiola also was on a team that I think had less talent surrounding. They had a really bad offensive coordinator for the majority of the season and a really bad scheme that did not play to anybody's strengths, certainly not his. And so, if you see the same thing this year in Raiola struggle, I'll probably push back on it. But I do think that you could see Raiola being better than Lagway this season, especially with the new coordinating changes. But based on what we saw last year, I would say Lagway's better.
Yes, I would agree with that. What really helps Lagway is they both have similar arm talent, but Lagway's the better supporting cast, and he is much more mobile, at least based on what we saw last year. Lagway's a true dual threat, and Raiola is more of your traditional pro-style quarterback, although he said he's going to be more mobile this year, so that's something I'm excited to see. PK says that North Carolina's schedule may be the weakest in the country. I agree with that. What are your thoughts there?
Let me refresh my memory on their schedule. I will say they definitely have a very favorable schedule being in the ACC. I don't think the ACC is very strong whatsoever. They do avoid Miami, which is nice. They get Clemson at home. Their out-of-conference is not bad. They do play TCU, but also at home and in week one. So, they managed to avoid some of the tougher opponents. They don't have to play SMU either, who made the playoffs. They do play Duke, but that game is also at home. Duke, I do think is going to be on the up and up. I wouldn't argue if you said North Carolina's got the easiest schedule. I certainly think that, like, outside of Clemson, every game is winnable at the very least.
Yeah. The fact that TCU may be one of their tougher opponents in their out-of-conference certainly speaks volumes. Let me see if there are any questions. Any thoughts on Nick Marsh and Michigan State and maybe how that plays out against Indiana? And he also asks if you were on YouTube. This is MSU #1 fan is the name of who asked this question.
WMSU. I do not currently have a YouTube channel. I'm going to be getting one started very soon, though. I do want to be throwing out content this season, especially from a gambling perspective. I think that's how most people want to follow my content. So I will have a channel soon. But right now you can find my live streams on Twitch, twitch.tv/Snowman Sports. My thoughts on Michigan State. I am a fan of Jonathan Smith. I love his program over at Oregon State. In terms of gambling, they were a team that we bet on a lot a few years ago and to great success. And honestly, this past season makes him look even better of a coach. You know why? Not because of what he did at Michigan State, but because what DJ Uiagalelei did at Florida State. The fact that he had DJU at a bad school like Oregon State and still was a competitive, good team, I think is very, very, very impressive in retrospect. Kind of a rebuilding year last year at Michigan State. He brought in Aiden Childs with him, who had known the scheme, but that was still really his first year as a starting quarterback. And, there were maybe a little bit of growing pains, like especially that game against, Boston College, I think, where he had a couple of bad picks.
Yes.
In that one. So I do expect him to improve. I mean, he had a whole season of kind of getting his ass kicked a little bit. But I do believe in Michigan State mainly because I'm a believer in Jonathan Smith.
I, too, am a believer in Jonathan Smith. I think that Michigan State's definitely going to go over their win total this year. and probably beat some teams that, per the power ratings, they shouldn't beat. Okay, we have a super chat, everyone. This is from Dave Valensky. It's a $5 super chat, so thank you for sending that one in. He asks...
W Dave, W super chats.
Exactly. He asks, who do we think will be the Group of 5 representative? He said he wouldn't be shocked if it's Toledo.
That is a very good question. That is a very good question. And honestly, that is a question that I have had a pretty tough time answering myself. I think that it is completely wide open for the Group of 5 teams to make the playoffs this season. I believe if you look at the odds, the team with the shortest odds is Boise State amongst the non-power conferences. They're sitting at like plus 172 right now, which feels a little crazy to me. Yes, I know that they're in a relatively weak conference, but losing Ashton Genty, he's just not like a normal running back that you can plug and replace. I mean, he was the entire team last season. This is not necessarily to dunk on Maddox Madsen, but I just don't necessarily know that I believe in Boise State's ability to get back to the playoffs, having to replace Genty like this. They also had one of the better defensive lines in college football last season. I believe they were like second in the country in sacks. So they lost some of those guys. The good thing they have going for them is that their hardest game on the schedule by far is not in conference. It's against Notre Dame. So if they do lose that game and kind of win everything else and win the conference championship, again, the schedule is certainly up there, but I have a tough time seeing that they're like this big of a favorite to make it back to the playoffs, especially compared to the rest of the Group of 5 teams. And then if it's not Boise State, then all of a sudden the question is, well, who's it going to be? I think it's a lot more difficult of a topic. Who are your thoughts on this one?
I would say Boise State intuitively because they bring back like 4/5 of their team last year, and kind of the 1/5 they don't return is Ashton Genty, and their schedule's pretty workable. I could see UNLV if they're able to get some talent out of their transfers.
I can't bet on a team quarterbacked by Alex Orji to make the playoffs. I can't do it.
Yeah, I do get that one. At the same time, it's Dan Mullen, so I mean, maybe if they can find a way to somehow make it work. But my safest pick would be Boise. You could maybe think of Tulane or USF just because.
That's why I was also going to say Tulane because they got Retzlaff, so he's probably the best quarterback in the Group of 5. And obviously, he was supposed to be at BYU in the Big 12, and so they kind of lucked into getting him. But they also lost Mekhi Hughes. It's tough. I just don't think the Boise State odds make sense. I guess they probably are the best candidate, but for the gambling odds, I wouldn't take it. I would lean more towards Tulane.
That makes sense. And Tulane also lost Darian Mensah to Duke, which is interesting because they also play Duke, which will be pretty fun. Next question is asked by College Football 360, wondering how many programs do you think Gunnar Stockton would start at in the SEC? He doesn't think it'd be many.
That's a good question. Are we talking about compared to this current season of starters, or in general, is his talent good enough to start?
This current season's crop.
This current season's crop. All right. So looking at the SEC, would he start over Alabama? Maybe. I think it would just really be a quarterback competition between him and Ty Simpson. Would he start at Arkansas? Probably not. I like Taylon Green. Would he start at Auburn? Probably. I mean, who's their quarterback right now? Jackson Arnold?
Jackson Arnold.
Yeah, so I think he's starting over Jackson Arnold. Florida, no. Lagway. Georgia, obviously, yes, because he's the starter there. Kentucky, yes. LSU, no. I think if Gunnar Stockton were available, they probably would have taken him over Pagula, but if they brought both in the roster, it would be another competition. Oklahoma, Mateer, probably pick Mateer. Ole Miss, Austin Simmons. I like Simmons. I think he's talented. I think Stockton could beat him out if he were on the same team. South Carolina, no. Tennessee, probably yes over Joey Aguilar. A&M, Marcel Reed. maybe not. Again, it's kind of like what do they want in the quarterback?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're comparing him to Connor Wegman, who beat out Marcel Reed initially last year, the answer is yes. So, like, if they were in competition, they decided they want a passer. Texas, no. Vandy, generally speaking, yes, although I probably would rather have Pavia this season.
Yeah, especially with the type of scheme and the fact that they have Jerry Kill there, who's like really involved with the offense, and he's really connected with Pavia. Baldfather Bet says, Snowman, Sam has told me a lot about you. What's your favorite spread pick week 1 so far?
What up, Baldfather? Great to see you. Hopefully it's all positive things.
It is.
My favorite week 1 spread, Nebraska minus 6.5 against Cincinnati. Absolutely.
Why?
I am not very high on Cincinnati. Yes, they have former Hoosier quarterback Brennan Sorsby, but I don't think the rest of the team is really all that good. Yes, they are technically a Big 12 opponent, but I do have them kind of at the bottom of the Big 12. And while this game is considered a neutral site game, it is being played at Arrowhead, which is favoring big time the Nebraska crowd. I believe I've seen some reports saying that it's expected to be about 90% Nebraska fans. So I think, as I said, I'm pretty high in Nebraska having a big improvement this year thanks to Dana Holgorsen. And I think they're going to unleash the offense in this game, and Cincinnati just won't be able to keep up. I think Nebraska's going to win this game by a touchdown for sure, if not 14-plus points in this game. I think the line is maybe a little bit low because we're looking at Nebraska from last season. And again, I'm expecting them to take big strides, especially offensively speaking. And Cincinnati just can't compete talent-wise with this team in what should functionally be a home game that you're getting a little bit better price for not being at Lincoln.
Yeah, it is a de facto. If it is 90-10 Nebraska, that is a de facto home game, even if it's not in Lincoln. Like at that point, it's essentially Memorial Stadium, just at a different location. I certainly think I'll have to think about that one. That's really interesting. I would have never expected that, because I look at it from paper and think that, yeah, Nebraska should win by that much, but Cincinnati has enough at, trench play and running back, and Sorsby, I think, is a good QB, to where week 1, if they're healthy, they could at least make it close, maybe play some game control, especially with some of Nebraska's questions on the defensive front. But I do agree that with Holgorsen and Raiola and those receivers, if they have it clicking in week 1, I don't think Cincinnati is the outside talent to keep up or stop them. So, good thoughts. I'll have to really think about that with my preview for that game.
And then a couple other lines that I'm looking at right now. Ohio State, Texas. I know that's the main game everyone wants to talk about, bet on. I will be on Ohio State at 2.5. That line is basically implying that these teams are relatively equal, maybe Texas a smidge better on a neutral site. Generally speaking, when it comes to college football lines, home field advantage is worth around 3 points. So Ohio State being a short favorite here tells me that these teams are being viewed by the books as pretty equal. And I think if you asked most fans which team is more talented, especially with the QB drop-offs, I think most people would say that Texas is the better roster of talent. And I do think most people are going to want to be betting on Texas to be betting on Arch Manning. So when you have all those factors, and Ohio State is still the favorite here, that is my lean there. It's at home. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for Arch to go in on the road in an insane environment like that with the national championship celebration happening. When, again, I do expect the majority of the public to be on Texas. And then the other game we talked about, Miami, Notre Dame. Miami's a 2.5-point dog right now. So the books are expecting Notre Dame, or at least the general public is liking Notre Dame. I disagree with that. I like Miami. This game's at home. I'm going to try to wait to get to 3 and see if the line moves in our favor. At the end of the day, there's not a big difference between 2 and 2.5, but there's a huge difference between 2.5 and 3.
Yes.
So I'd like to see where the line moves there. And if it does get to 3, I'll be all over Miami.
Yeah. Miami, I think Miami should win that game for sure. Just, I think everything goes their way. That might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but that one I strongly agree with. Black Dean asks, who will be more successful in their homecomings, Scott Frost at UCF or Rich Rod at West Virginia?
Great question. I personally don't think much will have either of them will have success this season. Long term, I would be much more confident in Rich Rod than Scott Frost.
Yeah, the telltale there is you can have an algorithm of like true if Alex Grinch isn't your defensive coordinator, or false if he is your defensive coordinator. I have no idea why he hired him. MSU number one fan asks another question, says, oh, he's been asking this. I didn't even mean to click on it, but here we go. Between us, who would win in an arm wrestle? I'd probably say you. I've never really won that many arm wrestles.
I might win just based on pure size. I'm like 6'4", 250, so I don't have like the guns that you would want in an arm wrestling competition, but just pure mass, I might have an advantage.
I'm 6'2", I think 6'3", about 220, 225.
All right, so actually it's a little more even than I thought. There we go.
Yeah, but
that'd be a good match. We'll have to see it someday.
Yes, that will be
just for you, MSU fan.
Yep. And then Bald Father bets yet again. What are some of your thoughts on the line movement from opening lines to now? So he cites Ohio State going from 4 to 2.5 favorite, Boise State from -8 to -6. Notre Dame from -3 to -2.5 or 2, and then Clemson from -3 to 4, even 4.5.
Yeah, so Ohio State, Notre Dame, the line movements just further emphasize what I want, right? The fact that the books actually open at 4 for Ohio State, implying that on a neutral site, they would make Ohio State a 1-point favorite, basically saying Ohio State is a slightly better team initially. And it's the general public that's saying, no, I want to bet Texas. I'm betting Texas. I want to bet Texas. Exactly what I thought was going to happen, which is why I want to bet on Ohio State, because, again, the general public always being on one side doesn't usually work out that well either.
Yes.
And same with Notre Dame, Miami. Like, this is a little bit different scenario where the public is betting on Miami versus Notre Dame, but another situation where I still think that, like, you know, if we can get and see the line movement, you know, reading line movements is interesting because a lot of times you have to compare the popularity of teams to how the line moves. Like, if the line is moving crazy in a game with two programs that no one gives a shit about, that's pretty telling that it's like, well, this is like sharp money that's moving it. Because, like, there's not like a ton of fans of, say, like a Bowling Green versus Buffalo game, right? There's no giant Bowling Green whales coming in with millions of dollars to move the line.
Exactly.
But that is certainly the case for a team like Notre Dame, for a team like Ohio State, for a team like Texas. But I think that the Notre Dame line, so the Ohio State line movement, I like because my thesis was it's the public betting on Texas. And while Notre Dame, Miami, there's certainly plenty of Miami fans, I would have guessed that the public sentiment is generally in favor of Notre Dame there. So I think that's probably more sharp money moving on the side of Miami.
That is, so I looked on FanDuel today, just as like out of curiosity, looking at some of the week 1 games, and the public, it's very, very early, but the public is like 3/4 on Notre Dame. Like, so they're pretty, and that makes sense. I mean, Notre Dame's being ranked top 5 in a lot of preseason publications, and Miami's top 20, top 15, some are top 10. I mean, a lot of people are thinking Notre Dame's just, you know, kind of, you should pen them in to go back to the playoffs, and we don't know if Miami is going to do that or not.
And one of my biggest rules for betting on college sports, rankings mean nothing.
Yes.
Rankings mean nothing. If you are making decisions based on the rank, you've already lost before you even got started. You know why the rankings exist? To promote TV games. So we could say, hey, it's number 1 versus number 2. Or, oh, look at that. We got a number 24 ranked Illinois playing tonight on Fox. Watch. Or at the end of the season, they could justify, well, Alabama has all these ranked wins. Look at these teams they beat who are now ranked 23 and 24. The true the rankings that are posted by the pollsters mean nothing.
Yeah. Power ratings, or what Vegas is pegging the teams rated at depending on different things, that's what matters.
That's...
I mean, FPI is memed into oblivion for a variety of reasons, and yet it's still better than the AP poll by a mile. All right. I think 100%. Last question we have here, again from PK. He wants to know if you hear anything from Indiana scrimmages, specifically one this past Saturday.
I haven't heard anything from the scrimmage Saturday. The main things I've been hearing from practice are the team is very high on Carter Smith. People are saying that he could be the best left tackle in the entire country. But I think Indiana's trying to keep a lot of their scheme and a lot of their stuff close to the chest. I don't think Cignetti wants to get a lot of stuff out there for other opponents to kind of get a read on. So I think you're hearing like a lot of praise being like, Carter Smith is a beast. Michael Kamara is looking like a beast. Pons is, you can't throw on him. But I think there's a lot of like, hey, let's talk everybody up and make them look good and try to obfuscate what's actually happening. So not a ton of information really to go off of in my mind right now.
It makes sense. I heard a friend of mine say that he said that Indiana was pretty confident in their team this year, like internally.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think that's the situation. It's like I think they're trying to promote like we're confident, we feel strength, this is going to be a solid team. I mean, honestly, I think the talent of this team is actually going to be better than last year's team.
Oh, 100%.
Even though the result is likely not to be as strong.
Yeah,
like 10-2 is the likely, or at least the high end likely scenario, which would be definitely worse than 11-1, even though the team would be definitely better.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully expect this team to be top 10 power ratings, like by mid-season. And maybe I'm too high on them, but Mendoza, in terms of talent, is better than Rourke. Hemby is way better than Justice Ellison. Their tight end Holden Stays is I forget that I think Zach Horton. He should be better than Zach Horton talent wise. They bring back their best receivers. Coogan is probably a match for Mike Caddick, and that shows how good Coogan is. I mean, Caddick was a beast. They return Smith, their two guards. And we already talked about who they bring back on defense. I mean, this should be a mean team in my mind. Well, I think that's it. And it was a pretty good show. Had you on for an hour, 50 minutes. I really appreciated you coming on. Before we get out of here, is there anything else you want to add?
It's pretty much all I got. I'm very excited for college football to start. Counting down the days. We're only 13 days away. And I'm very excited as a Hoosier fan. This is the first offseason really since the previous year that we did well when we had Michael Penix. And then he got hurt in like the third game of the season. And then we like went 3-9 that year. So this is the first year that it's like coming off of where I have super high expectations. And honestly, there's nobody on the team that's as important as Penix Jr. was, where even if Mendoza got hurt, I still think it's kind of like a next man up mentality. And yes, I don't think we make the playoffs if, let's say, Mendoza gets out for the season and we got to go to the backup. But I still think we would make a bowl game at a minimum, which is, a far cry from what happened in the past when IU had to go to the backup quarterback. So very excited for this season. Very excited for everything in the world of college football. Very excited to be talking about it on a daily basis. Again, if you want to check out my stream, twitch.tv/Snowman Sports. We're live every single day talking gambling, football, baseball, basketball, UFC, random, whatever sports are on that day. We're talking about it. Would love to see you in the chat.
Awesome. One thing that just popped in my mind that you can address with brevity. What are you thinking about that week 0 game? Kansas State, Iowa State.
My initial thought was Kansas State, mainly because I'm a big fan of Chris Kleinman. I'm not to talk shit about Matt Campbell or anything, but I think there's a coaching edge in this game for Kansas State, just because I think Kleinman is one of the better, more underrated coaches in the country. The quarterback matchup is pretty equal. I mean, both guys are returning starters, Avery Johnson versus Rocco Becht. But I also think that Avery Johnson is a much better athlete and playmaker at the QB position. And given that Ohio State lost their best two receivers by far in Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel, I think it's going to be a lot harder for Iowa State to get it going offensively. So that's why I'm going to lean to Kansas State as they have the better offense in my mind with more playmakers and a coaching edge.
I'm so excited for that game, given how the last two Ireland games last 2 out of 3, because Notre Dame Navy was not a game. I mean, that was blowout from the minute the teams took the field. But Nebraska Northwestern was a tight one. Same thing with Florida
Frost
State.
Onside kick. Never forget.
Oh my gosh.
Never forget.
Oh, so awful. If I have one regret about this channel, it's picking them to win the West, and then by week 3, he's fired, and it's over. That was so bad. So bad. Oh, my gosh. And then they beat Iowa to close out the year.
That season. Right?
What?
They had such high expectations that season, and one half of the first game was all you needed to know that it was about to be a dumpster fire season.
Yeah, like losing to Clay Helton at home was just was peak like peak hot dog water. Like that was your team right there. It was just like the leftover water from the hot dog that no one wants to drink. Horrible.
Facts.
Well, thank you for coming on. Again, make sure to check out his Twitch, his Twitter, Snowman Sports, and then what is it? Snowman underscore sports on Twitter is what it
Correct.
is.
Yes.
Yep. Check it out, everyone. Make sure to like, make sure to subscribe, make sure to hit the notification bell, and we will see you tomorrow and also Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm also, for any of you, especially since we have some Spartan fans in here, I will be joining the Locked On Spartans YouTube show. Don't know when they'll release that live, but I'm going on with them tomorrow, and a video there will be released, I imagine, sometime this week. So